Hello, everyone, and welcome on this Saturday to the wild, weird, wacky, but wonderful world of the Word. And, there's one thing that comes up for debate every time we get together for Bible study, and that is who has the best translation of the Bible? Which translation should we use? I mean, come on. Should we use the King James or should we use the Revised Standard Version? Well, let me tell you this. I'm going to show you my little pile of books here. This is only some of the ones that I have. There's the Greek. This is the King James Version. This is the New International Version. This is the New Revised Standard Version. This is the Message. This is the Good News for Modern Man. All those are different translations of the Bible that we have and can use. And they all have their pluses and they all have their minuses. So which one do you use? Well, use them all. If you're going to do a good, complete study of the Bible, use them all. Personally, when I'm getting ready for Bible study or getting ready to do a sermon, I read the scripture passages we're going to be talking about in as many different versions as I can. And I have things on my computer that literally have almost 100 different versions that you can look at, different translations. Some of them really good and some not so good. And I'm just going to give you a little example here. Well, that light is kind of bright, isn't it? Okay. Let's just say you're looking at Matthew, the 18th chapter, and I'm relying on an older textbook that I have that's called How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, A Guide to Understanding the Bible. It was copyright way back in 1993, so it's, 30-some years old almost. But it's still good. It's still good in a lot of different ways, but it misses out on some of the later translations that I have right in front of me right now. But it gives an example. Say you have this passage from Isaiah and reading from the New American Standard Bible, which was a pretty decent translation. It goes from Isaiah 5:10, "For 10 acres of vineyard will yield only one bath of wine, and a homer of seed will yield but an ephah of grain." Yeah, so you go home and you tell your wife that, your husband that, you go home and you tell your friends that. They know exactly what you're talking about. Give me that bath of wine. Come on. Well, that's when you do a really super literal translation of the Hebrew into English. Here's what the Good News Bible, this is how it puts that same passage. "The grapevines growing on 5 acres of land will yield only 5 gallons of wine. 10 bushels of seed will produce only 1 bushel of grain." Hey, that's a little more helpful. Now, where it doesn't quite get as helpful, but it still is helpful, is when you start talking monetary units that get adjusted for inflation or don't get adjusted for inflation. For instance, let's go to Matthew 18, and there it's the parable of the unjust steward. The one who owed a whole bunch of money, got forgiven, and then went out and was wringing the neck of his fellow servant who owed him just a little bit. Reading from the New American Standard Bible, once again, which tended to be a very literal translation, "There was brought to him one who owed him 10,000 talents. But that slave went out and found one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. Yeah, we know exactly that. Yeah, I lent my neighbor some denarii and he still hasn't paid me back. That bum, he probably never will." Hey, how much is that? We don't know. But how about using the Good News for Modern Man that was, 60s type of thing, maybe in the early 70s. "One of them was brought in who owed him millions of dollars. Then the man went out and met one of his fellow servants who owed him a few dollars. That makes a little more sense to us. The whole parable was meant to show the great disparity involved in the two amounts that were owed. So that makes it a lot more helpful. But the whole point of it is you have to look at different translations, because even now the good news is outdated. It's outdated. And the Message tries to pick up some of those disparities and differences in the same way the good news did, but in a more updated way. But give it another 10 years or so, that's not going to be really accurate historically, but it'll give you a good feel for what's going on. Another thing is the fact that in a lot of these scriptures that we're studying, there's euphemisms in there. Euphemisms mean, hey, we're trying to cover up the stuff that we don't normally talk about, like going to the bathroom or sex, So you try to smooth it over a little bit. And so here you can have this going on. This comes from Genesis, the 31st chapter. Rachel said, I am having my period. Okay. All right. That's more understandable than the literal translation of the Hebrew, which is, the manner of women is upon me. What's the manner of women that's upon me? She's having her period. All right. But now, if you go to Genesis, the 18th chapter, you hear it say, the Good News Bible says Sarah had stopped having her monthly periods. Okay, and that's good. But the New International Version has even a freer translation that goes, Sarah was past the age of childbearing. Okay, now we get it. It means she's a little bit older, and she just can't have kids anymore. So you have all those different things that go on. How about you move all the way to Paul's letter to the Corinthians? That's so full of idioms, it can drive you crazy, especially those who choose to read it very literally and have one of these translations that's very literal. For instance, you have this in 1 Corinthians 7, chapter 7, the first verse. It is good for a man not to marry. Oh, you see, that's a literal translation, but it's an idiom. The idiom is to touch a woman. And that literally is supposed to mean to have sexual intercourse with her. So that doesn't mean anything close to it's better for a man not to get married. No. It's here we have the New American Bible says a better way of putting it is a man is better off having no relations with a woman. See, a lot of times the Bible is just kind of, and the translators are kind of afraid to be too forthright with what it's really saying, because it's an idiom in its original language, and you're trying to push that into our language now, and sometimes those literal translations are kind of, they push you off. But, well, let's make a long story short here. Don't just stick with one translation. Go with several translations and try to get a better feel for what's happening. And if you have a really good study Bible, it's going to put off in the margins little footnotes that help you out, saying, this is an idiom that literally means this, but it's not something that you have to go ahead and read aloud in church and embarrass grandma and have all the little kids going, Mommy, what's that mean? Daddy, what's that all about? Okay, you get it? That's why there's euphemisms in translation, trying to smooth over those more uncomfortable translations that would be translated that literally. So, getting down to brass tacks, which translation of the Bible should I use? Once again, all of them. And I know you're not going to be doing this one too much, which is the Greek one. But don't forget, That Greek one is what all these are based on. They're all trying to translate that Greek language into something understandable in our English language. And you not only have the English language, look how many languages you have all around the world. Think of the work of translators having to do that in all those different ways. Well, that's all I wanted to say this Saturday about the wild, weird, and wacky world of the Word. Oh, because that Word is wonderful, and we want it to be wonderful for our lives. God's blessings be with you, and we'll see you next week.